Reback, our Vice President of Policy Initiatives, Ann Lee, our Vice President of Family Support, Lindsay Stone, Vice President of Community Outreach, Kelly Mortimer, our Communications Officer, Malia Herman, our ex officio, and Nicole Josie will be our Vice President of Equity and Inclusion will be joining us shortly. It's our pleasure tonight to have Ms. Susie Bedine, the Assistant Superintendent of Special Services, here to present an overview of special services in our district. You are welcome to post questions. There's a little Q&A. If you click on the three dots on the lower right-hand corner, you should see a Q&A somewhere there. Let me see. Oh, no, the Q&A is right there on the right. Sorry, I see it. And if we have time, we will get to them. If not, we will collect the questions and send them to Ms. Budine and post them later. Thank you for your attention. And Ms. Budine, it's you now. It's all you.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. We're so glad to have you and appreciate you joining us. This evening, we're going to take a little time to talk about the Special Services Department in the district and take a look from the inside out. There's a lot of information that we'd like to share with parents so that we answer maybe some of the questions that you've had along the way with different people that you've met and how different systems work. So we'll go through lots of different information. Please feel free to post questions in the Q&A. We're happy to answer them if we have the opportunity, like Ms. Casatino said. Please just try to have your questions ask more general questions, not necessarily specifically about your individual child, and we'll try to get to them if we can by the end. So I'm just going to share my presentation. Okay, can everybody see the presentation? Great, thank you so much. Okay, so we'll get started talking about the Special Education and Related Services Department, looking from the inside out. Oops, sorry. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll talk about the special services team that you'll encounter when you work with the department. Of course, you've met me now, the Assistant Superintendent of Special Services, and then we have 4 supervisors that work with the department, Mr. Leroy Johnson, Ms. Karen Tomney, Ms. Sue Ellis, and Mr. Chris Mullen. And each of those supervisors have a different set of responsibilities for the department and a different group of people that they supervise and oversee. So Mr. Johnson oversees the preschool department, including the preschool self-contained program. Ms. Tomney oversees the elementary program except for self-contained. So she oversees all of our in-class support and pull-out resource programming at the elementary level. Ms. Ellis oversees our middle school programming, our K-8 self-contained programming, our pre-K ABA program, and our evidence-based reading program. And Mr. Mullen oversees the high school program, including self-contained at the high school level, related services, and paraprofessionals for the district. These are our child study team members that work with each of the different schools. So I won't go through and read all of them, but you can take a look at the different case managers that we have. Most of our case managers, not all, but most of our case managers work with 2 different schools and service the students in those schools, and they each carry a caseload for the schools that they're working with. We do have some positions that are currently in the process of being filled. We have staff members to fill them, but we're waiting for them to do their they have to resign 60 days before they can move to their next position. So we're in that 60-day wait with those staff members. So there are some TBDs there, and we're waiting for them to come on board at the moment. So this is just another look at some of these same staff members as well as related services. So you can see who's a school psychologist, who's a social worker, who's an LDTC or learning consultant, who's a speech therapist, a BCBA or board certified behavior analyst, our occupational therapist, and our physical therapist. I will mention that we have a number of contracted staff members in the related services department that work with us. They are not listed here. These are our on-staff related service providers, and then we fill in the additional needs with contracted staff throughout the school year. So let's take a little bit of time to talk about our students and the profile of our special services department. So currently in South Orange Maplewood School District, we have roughly 1,201 students who are classified. That means students who have an IEP throughout the district. This is a percentage of about 16.8% classification rate. The state average is a little bit over that. It's 17%, so we're just under the state average for classification percentage. There are currently 79 students in the process of being referred and or evaluated by the child study team. About 125 of our students are placed out of district, and that's about 1.8% of our student population that are placed in out of district placements. We service about 458 students with 504 plans, and we receive referrals from a number of different areas, from child study team, from the INRS team, from parents and guardians, staff members, and we also receive referrals through early intervention. We'll take a little time a little bit later to talk about the difference between an IEP plan and a 504 plan, the INRS team and what they do, and some of these different areas so that you'll get more information about that as we go. So let's talk about our process for struggling learners. So this is starting with when we have a student in the general education classroom that's struggling, whether that be academically, behaviorally, maybe they have a health issue that's impeding their learning. What do we do and how does that work when we're working through that process? For students who have, issues that are interrupting their education and they're struggling, we start with tier one supports. So these are supports that are general supports that are available to most students because at one time or another, all students may struggle with content or with an activity that's going on in the classroom. And tier one supports are readily available for all of our students when they need it. And these are interventions that are typically handled in the classroom by the teacher in the classroom based on whatever the child may need at that particular time. If we have a student who continues to struggle and the tier one supports aren't enough to help them really kind of connect with their education and continue to progress forward, then we might take a look at tier two supports. So these are more specific and targeted interventions that would be provided for a smaller group of students because not every student is going to need this level of support. So once we get into tier one supports, they're more targeted, they're more individualized, and they're looking at a smaller group of students receiving these supports. They might receive these supports in the classroom, or they might be pulled out of the classroom to receive supports depending on what's going on. So, for example, if we have a child that needs an opportunity to focus and have a quiet environment to complete an activity, we might move them to an area that has less distractions for them to help them focus a little bit better. Or if we want to work with them one-on-one, we might take them one-on-one and work with them one-on-one. And this can be provided by the classroom teacher or by another specialist who might work with the student on an area that they have expertise in. If after tier one and tier two supports, we still have students who are struggling, we move on to tier three supports. So these supports are really for a much smaller population of students. They're highly individualized and they're specifically targeted at the area of difficulty so that we're really working to intervene and help our students be successful. At this level, we often will see the intervention and referral services or INRS team become involved. So the INRS team is a multidisciplinary team that comes together to look at a student's particular area of need and to put together a multidisciplinary plan for how to support that student. This is much more targeted and we collect data and we have a timeline and so on and so forth. So this team includes the classroom teacher and it also includes the parent guardian. And we try to brainstorm and come up with interventions that will help the student be successful. So the team together will collectively develop a plan for the student. They'll put that plan into place and they'll collect data and track the student's progress with these interventions in place for about 6 or 8 weeks. At the end of 6 or 8 weeks, then the team comes back together and they take a look at how things are going. Is the student doing better? Is this working for the student? Is this not working for the student? And we have to try something different. Do we want to let it go a little bit longer and see how things go? So the team works together to kind of track these interventions and see what might be needed next. These interventions might be done in the classroom. They're often pull-out services, and they might be provided by the classroom teacher or by another specialist who's working with the child. The difference between a 504 plan and an individual health plan, it can often be confused. So a 504 plan falls under the Section 504 law that has to do with discrimination. So the 504 plan is a plan that's put into place for a child with a disability so that they're not discriminated against in the classroom. So ultimately what that means is that they are not being kept from accessing their education. So, for a student who has a disability that's significantly impacting a major life function and has an impact on their progress and learning in the classroom, but do not require special education and related services, the 504 team may find that they're eligible for a Section 504 plan. And this is where they build in those accommodations to help the student be successful and have access to their education. So, it does require a documented disability, unlike the INRS plan. An INRS plan does not require a documented disability, but a Section 504 plan does. It addresses the educational impact of the disability for the student's learning in the classroom. It's revised annually, it provides accommodations, and the assistant principal is the case manager for this plan. What's a little bit different about an individualized health plan is that the health plan really focuses on the medical or health related accommodations that the student might need. So if there's a health related condition that needs to be managed in school, it does require medical documentation, and then that plan puts in place the medical needs for the student, and the nurse is the case manager for that. You will often see a student who has two plans, the 504 plan and the health plan together. So I'll give you an example. If we have a student who has diabetes, and they need to have their blood sugar managed. While they're in the classroom, they may need to leave and go to the nurse to receive medical attention for, maintaining their blood sugar, but maybe they were in the middle of taking a test. So the 504 plan would give them extended time to finish that test while they're out of the room and receiving services from the nurse. But the medical plan would dictate under these conditions, the child comes to the nurse and receives this particular medical intervention. So you'll sometimes see those two plans work together, but they serve two different purposes to address two different components. And these can often be kind of confused about what each plan does. So that's how they're separated. One is the educational component and one is the medical component. So perhaps we have a student who's been through tier one, tier two, tier three, and a 504 might not be enough. And we say, you know what, we really need to take a closer look and we need to refer to the child study team. Additional supports might be needed, and we suspect that there might be a disability. So in that case, a referral would be sent to the child study team for potential evaluation. That, like we said, that could come from parents, it could come from a staff member, it could come from the INRS team. But either way, when the referral is received, the process is the same. Once we receive that referral, within 20 days, the child study team, which is the school psychologist, the learning consultant, and the social worker, as well as a speech therapist if we're looking at a preschooler, will meet together with the parent or guardian and the child's teacher to talk about what's going on, to talk about the concerns, and to talk about what we think might be going on. And then they'll make a determination if evaluations are warranted. If those evaluations are warranted, then the team has up to 90 days to complete all of the evaluations and then to hold what's called an eligibility meeting to determine whether or not the child is eligible for special education and related services. If the child is eligible for special education and related services at that eligibility meeting, they may also hold an IEP meeting or an individualized education plan meeting at the same time, rather than having the parent or guardian have to come back twice for a second meeting. We can do both of them on the same day, the eligibility and the IEP meeting together at the same time. The IEP meeting has to occur at least once every year. So parents and guardians are asked every year to come back to the table and to revise the IEP for the upcoming year. And that can fall at any time during the school year. Some students may have that in September or December or February or May. It just depends. but at least one time a year, we have to take a look at the IEP and plan for the upcoming year. That doesn't mean that we can't have an IEP meeting at any time if that's necessary. So we're not precluded to only have one meeting a year. We can have more than one meeting if necessary, but we can't have less than one meeting every year to update the plan. Reevaluations then occur every 3 years. So on a 3-year cycle, we go in, we take a look, we look at what updated evaluations we'd like to do, and we do a set of updated evaluations to determine whether or not the child still remains eligible, but also to really take a look at where the child is at that time for programming and services and different components like that, so that we're sure that we're staying on top of the needs of the student and writing plans that are effective for helping them to progress and continue to grow and be successful. We can, of course, evaluate in less than 3 years if we feel that's necessary, but typically we'll do those reevaluations every 3 years. So the eligibility piece. So when a student has a condition and qualifies under one of the categories in the New Jersey Administrative Code, that's one piece of the eligibility aspect. So first they have to qualify under the classification category. Then they must be demonstrating an impact to their educational performance that's not related to a lack of instruction or limited English proficiency, and they must require special education services. So, for example, if we have a student that has dyslexia, but they're reading on grade level and they're not struggling with their reading, even though they have a reading disability under one of the categories, they're not showing the impact in the classroom and they don't require that special education service. So they would not be considered eligible in that particular situation. On the other hand, if we had a child that had a diagnosis of dyslexia, they were reading 3 grade levels below grade level and so on and so forth, they would, because they're showing both the impact and the need for the special education services in addition to that classification category in the code. So these are the different classification categories in the New Jersey Administrative Code. I have highlighted the other health impairment, autism, and specific learning disability categories, just to point out that those are the top 3 categories of classification in our particular district. So we have the most students classified under those 3 categories, but we do have students classified under almost every category in the New Jersey Administrative Code. There's 1 or 2 that we don't, but we do have students that meet most of the different categories in the administrative code. So let's take a little time now and talk about the difference between the IEP and the 504 plan. This question comes up a lot, and hopefully this will help to answer some questions. So first we'll talk about the individualized education plan, or the IEP. The IEP provides programming and services that really target the student's particular needs and helps them receive a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. So these are 2 acronyms that you'll hear often, FAPE and LRE. They're a big part of special education related services and the foundation upon which everything is built. So we want to be sure that we're putting together a plan of services and supports and interventions that are helping our students have a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment, or in the environment that has the least amount of intervention needed to help them be successful. It's again reviewed annually, as we discussed, and developed collaboratively with the IEP team. The IEP team includes a child study team case manager, a special education teacher, a general education teacher, the parent and guardian, sometimes the student, and sometimes related service providers, depending on the particular profile of the student and the particular needs of the students. And some of the information that you might see in your individualized education plan are things like the classification category and the evaluations. Every time we do an annual review or an IEP meeting, we take a look at present levels. Where is the student functioning right now? Because that's the baseline of what the plan is going to plan for. This is where we are right now, and we use that information to help develop goals and objectives and their needs and so on and so forth. You'll see accommodations and modifications, specialized programming. You might see information about an extended school year if we have a student who requires that. A paraprofessional might be listed in there if that's something that the child needs under supplemental aids and services. The impact on education, there's a little section that talks about how the student's disability impacts their education, and that explains all of that out. We talk about the student's strengths and areas of need. We develop goals and objectives for the upcoming year, what we're going to work on and what we're going to target. Related services might be in there for a student who has speech or occupational therapy or something of that nature. For students who are 14 or older, there's a transition plan section that talks about what we're working towards for the child once they graduate and move on from high school to adult living. So there's a whole section for that. We track progress and we track the percentage of time that a student is removed from the general education program. That is an important part of the least restrictive environment, making sure that we're not pulling our children away from their non-disabled peers any more than we absolutely have to. The 504 plan, on the other hand, is a little bit different and has a little bit of a different approach. So the 504 plan provides accommodations to make sure that, as we discussed briefly before, our student is not discriminated against due to their physical or mental impairment, so that they have access to their education and they're able to continue to grow and progress without being inhibited because of their particular disability or impairment. It's typically reviewed annually, but something that you might see with the 504 that's very different from an IEP is that some 504 plans might not change much year over year. So, for example, the student who had diabetes that I spoke about before, what their 504 plan looks like each year may be very, very similar because they don't really need a change in that versus an IEP that changes every year and has a brand new plan every year for what's going to come up for the following year. So that's something that you might see that's a little bit different. It's developed collaboratively with the assistant principal, the teacher, and the parent or guardian, sometimes the student if the student is involved. And they work to put that plan together and put those accommodations in place. Some information that you might see in your 504 documentation is the physical or mental impairment that's impacting a major life function, the major life activity or function that's being impacted and how it's being significantly affected or substantially limited. An evaluation or a medical diagnosis, something of that nature, that's identifying the particular disabling condition, accommodations, and supplemental aids and services. What you don't see sometimes in a 504 plan that you might see in an IEP, you might not see goals and objectives in a 504, you might not see modifications, special education programming, you might not see an extended school year, major removal from the general education setting, scheduled progress monitoring aside from the report card, and that kind of a thing. So the 504 plan isn't quite as involved and doesn't have quite as many sections as an IEP plan typically does. So we're now going to spend a little bit of time talking about our special education programming across the district, what different programs we offer, and the continuum from the least restrictive to the most restrictive. So the New Jersey Administrative Code requires the districts to offer a full continuum of programming for our students with disabilities. And so this shows you the continuum that we offer from, like I said, the least restrictive to the most restrictive. So the first level would be a student who's not classified. That's the least restrictive that you can possibly be. So it's full inclusion, no supports in place. That's the program that a general education student would experience. Moving up from that, the next level would be consultative services. So this is a situation where we might have a student that doesn't necessarily need direct services any longer. So perhaps they were receiving speech services and they're to the point where they're almost ready not to receive speech services anymore, but we want to take just a little bit of time and make sure that the student is firm and going to maintain their skills without direct services. So we would put them on consultation where the speech therapist would check in with the student, check in with the teacher, maybe once a month, make sure everything's okay, everything's continuing to progress accordingly. And then if everything goes okay, then they would remove the speech services altogether. So that's what consultative services are. Next would be inclusion with a paraprofessional. So we might have a student in a general education classroom with the support of a paraprofessional, one-to-one or shared. And they help them with a number of different components, like maybe prompting or redirecting, behavioral interventions, or physical supports. But there's not necessarily a special education teacher in that particular setting. So they might have a class where there's no special education teacher, just a general education teacher, but they do still have the support of the paraprofessional in that particular class. Next is the in-class support program, and this is where we have a student in a general education setting with a general education teacher and a special education teacher. And those two teachers work together to help teach the entire class and also to provide the accommodations and modifications and supports that are necessary for the student to be able to remain successful in a general education classroom with their general education peers. There's often a misunderstanding that in an in-class support classroom that the content is watered down, that they move at a slower pace, that they don't receive the same instruction as the other classes. An in-class support class is the same as any other general education classroom. They receive the same content, instruction, pacing, and so on and so forth as any other general education classroom. They just have two teachers in the classroom to help with the supports that are necessary for students to be able to, kind of keep up in that environment. So that's what an in-class support class is. Pull-out resource would be next, and this is a situation where we have a student who needs more intense intervention in a particular subject area. So rather than staying in the general education classroom for a particular subject, they're pulled out into a smaller environment where there's a smaller student group with a special education teacher that's reducing that staff to student ratio so that they can receive more individualized attention. In this particular environment, they do stay aligned with the general education curriculum, and they do learn predominantly the same content as the students who are in the in-class support classroom. They might do it at a little bit of a slower pace, and they might go a little more in depth into some content area so that they can, kind of gather that information and be successful with it with a little more intensive support. And that's, of course, in a separate classroom with a special ed teacher. There might be modifications to the curriculum. It's typically not a full replacement of the curriculum. They're still staying aligned with that general education curriculum. The self-contained classrooms are next, and these are called special class programs in the New Jersey Administrative Code. These are situations where we have students that need intensive intervention for very specific sets of needs. And so they're able to take advantage of a classroom where it's targeted towards their specific needs. So this is centered around, like I said, the specialized need. The instruction and supports are all specialized to meet those needs. And the students are serviced predominantly in the same classroom for the bulk of the day, but not the entire day. There are varying degrees of what we call push out opportunities for our students. So when they're ready, we can push them out into less restrictive environments and let them transition from a self-contained setting to a less restrictive environment, maybe to a pull-out resource room or an in-class support classroom when they're ready. So there are several different types of self-contained or special class programs throughout our district. We have our preschool disabilities self-contained program, learning and language disabilities, multiple disabilities, some of those programs using community-based instruction or structured learning experience programming, emotional regulation impairment, and autism self-contained using ABA programming, a framework of ABA, which we'll go into some of these in a little bit more depth as we go through the presentation. So these are the different special class programs that we offer throughout the district. The next most restrictive setting would be an out-of-district placement. So this is when we have a situation where we have a student who needs such specialized intervention that they might need programming or supports that aren't offered in our district. And in that particular situation, we would want to look for a program out of district that provided the very specialized intervention that the student might need. And then they would attend that out of district school rather than coming to school in one of our in-district schools. So New Jersey state approved programs are one kind of out of district placement, and then there are Naples placements, what's called a Naples placement. By law, we're required to explore New Jersey state approved programming first. That is considered less restrictive. And that starts with a program that's in another public school district. So, for example, if we are looking for some kind of program, maybe it's a transitional program of some kind that we don't offer in our district, but the next town over offers the program that we're looking for in their public school district, we have to look there first and place a student there because it's considered less restrictive. There's opportunities for them to have exposure to non-disabled peers and so on and so forth. From there, we would move to public school options. So we have county schools and other public schools that offer out of district placements. We would look there, and then we would look at state approved private schools. If we work through all of those options and we still are not able to find a program that meets the student's needs, then we have the opportunity to seek non-state approved private schools for students with disabilities for potential placement in a Naples, what's called a Naples placement, and that's a non-state approved placement. We do have to have permission from the county for that placement. So if we do seek a Naples placement, we have to put a request into the county and get permission for placement in a Naples placement, which we don't need if we go with a state approved program. Let me see, what didn't I talk about there? Least restrictive, public schools, state approved schools. Okay, and then the last most restrictive form of special education would be home instruction or bedside instruction. So this is a situation where we have a student that's not able to come to school. So maybe the student had surgery and they're home recovering and they're not able to come to school. Or we have a student who's in the hospital and can't come to school. We would send someone to the home or someone to the hospital to provide that instruction for the student and keep them moving forward with their education. And that's considered the most restrictive form of programming. A question that often comes up is, what's the difference between the ABA programming and our other self-contained programs? So I wanted to take a few moments and just kind of break that down a little bit and talk about that. So what's similar about the ABA program compared to other self-contained programs? So it's a self-contained setting, as we had discussed. The teacher targets their interventions and their instruction at meeting individualized student needs. Instruction is differentiated, meaning that it's not exactly the same for every student. It's targeted at individual student needs and individual student supports. And there are opportunities for integration with non-disabled peers as the students are ready. So that's the same for all of our self-contained special programs. But what's different about an ABA class? So in our ABA classes, we use components of the applied behavior analysis framework to help our students be successful. So this methodology is a scientific approach at basically collecting data and looking at how our students respond to different interventions and looking for those things that are help our students be most successful, the ones that are the best fit for the individual student, and then utilizing those supports to help our students continue to grow and progress. We use assessments called the VB MAP or the ABLES, depending on the student's age, to take a look at targeted skills. So these assessments look at the skills that our students have, where they are in that progress, and what skills we're missing so that we don't miss any skills along the way and we fill all of those skills in. We use the results of those assessments to help target our goals and objectives for our students so that we know that we're targeted on the right areas for them to help them grow and progress. And then we provide intensive individualized instruction with a high rate of repetition, including an embedded schedule of reinforcement. So what you'll often hear about is first then language. First, we're going to complete X, Y, and Z, and then we're going to have a 5-minute break. And you can play with a preferred item. So we're going to complete this math activity, and then we're going to play with the cars for 5 minutes, or whatever the case may be. And that's a scheduled part of their learning intervention. There's a lot of intensive modeling of behaviors. We control sensory input. Often students in this environment struggle with a lot of like sensory overload. So we make sure that we're not creating an environment that has too much sensory input and our students aren't able to grasp the material that they're working on or be successful in the environment. Our teachers are trained in the principles of ABA, reinforcing skills and reduction of those things that are inhibiting their learning so that we don't engage in activities that are going to inhibit learning, but instead we engage in activities that are going to help our students progress and grow. We also have a board certified behavior analyst or BCBA that works directly with the teachers in the classroom and works with the students to help them continue to grow by analyzing the data that we collect and looking for those patterns that are most successful for the student. In this classroom, we have at least a 3-to-1 staff to student ratio, but often less. We'll often see a 2-to-1 or a 1-to-1 for different students, depending on what the individual situation is in these environments. There are two other specialized programs that I want to just share a little bit of information about so that you know what they are if you hear about them. One is CBI or community-based instruction, and the other is SLE or structured learning experiences. So CBI or community-based instruction is educational instruction that occurs in natural environments in the community environment, and it helps to provide our students with real life experiences. So it aligns with the general education standards, but it's a modified curriculum that helps meet individual student needs that usually involves hands-on activities and hands-on learning opportunities that are executed out in the community. So if I'm learning math, and I need to learn how to make change, we go to the grocery store and we do a grocery store trip, and I learn to use those skills in the grocery store, making change or knowing what change I should receive in the grocery store, that kind of a thing. This can be for students of all ages, but it really is targeted towards students at the ninth grade or above for the most part. It also helps students acquire those skills to live in the world today, especially within their own communities. So we focus on the community where the student lives so that they're learning their own community, how to get around their own community, how to navigate their community. Where's the post office? Where's the laundromat? Where's the bowling alley? You know, that kind of a thing. Structured learning experience is the next step then in that process. It's experiential, directed, and in-depth learning experiences that are designed to offer students the opportunity to explore career interests. So structured learning experience now takes a work perspective to that real life learning out in the community. So it aligns with the general education 21st century and transitional standards, but it also embeds components of the general education program on a modified level into the different activities that the students are doing when they're out in the community or they're out having a work experience. Students have to be at least 16 years old, and this can extend all the way through graduation if we have a student that needs that. They do have to be overseen by an SLE or structured learning experience teacher. And there is a certification that goes with that. So we have a teacher that takes those courses and then gets an SLE certification. And they oversee the different environments where the student is working, the different skills that they're working on, and the different components of that program. And it can include unpaid or volunteer opportunities as well as paid employment as a part of that program. So the next thing that we're going to do is take a look at the different people that you may encounter along the way when you're working with the child study team or the related services personnel, people that you might see in your IEP meetings, people that you might be talking to along the way that are servicing your child, and who they are, what their acronyms stand for, and what it is that they do. So the first one that we'll start with is the learning consultant, LDTC, or Learning Disabilities Teacher Consultant. So, what does my learning consultant do? So, the learning consultant serves as an educational specialist. They're the people that really understand learning and the different components of learning and teaching to be able to support the teachers, the paraprofessionals, the administrators, the parents and guardians, and the students. So, they will often work closely with all of those different people on the programming for students, and they're also an important part of that eligibility and IEP process to bringing their expertise to the table to give input and help and support in that area. They evaluate students, of course, for initial referrals, triennial reviews, or on an as needed basis. Their particular evaluation is centered on the educational piece and where the child is functioning educationally. They write IEPs, they function as case managers for students on their caseload. They develop, plan, and provide training for the staff whenever necessary, or for students or parents and guardians. They work cooperatively with the other child study team members and the related services specialists to provide the necessary supports for students. They also work collaboratively with me and the other supervisors to develop and shape an educationally effective program across the district for whatever school they may be working in. And then here's a list of our current learning consultants in the district. Next is your school psychologist and what your school psychologist does. So your school psychologist determines and monitors the mental health services that our students may need, and also to help our students succeed academically, emotionally, and socially. They're specifically trained to link mental health and learning and behavior together in understanding how to provide those supports in a learning environment for our students. They, of course, evaluate students and provide a psychological evaluation for initials, triennials, or on an as needed basis. The psychological evaluation has to do with our students' learning capacity, what they're capable of in regards to what are their strengths. Do they learn best from listening? Do they learn best from seeing? Do they learn best from doing things in a tactile manner? Are they strong in this particular area and they're not, they need support in another area, like that kind of a thing. So they're looking at the students' capacities as far as learning and where the strengths and needs are. They write IEPs and case manage students on their particular caseload. Of course, they develop, plan, and provide professional development as needed. They work cooperatively with the rest of the child study team. They conduct risk assessments for students who may be at risk for suicide or homicide and provide crisis intervention services as needed related to that. They also connect families with appropriate social and emotional services as needed. And these are a list of your school psychologists throughout the district. Next is your social worker. And your social worker's role is to help parents and guardians, students, and faculty identify needs that interfere with learning, and to provide students with services that are related to social, emotional, and behavioral concerns. They evaluate students, again, for initials, triennials, and on an as needed basis. The social worker completes a social history, and what that's looking at is the family dynamic and the different components of what's impacting our students from birth on up through life in general. So this typically happens at the initial, and you don't typically do a social history again unless some dynamic changes in the child's life. Not that it can't be done, but you might not do a social history again after your initial referral. Social workers also write IEPs and case manage students on their caseload. They develop, plan, and provide training as needed. They connect with families to provide appropriate social and emotional services as needed. They work collaboratively with the other members of the child study team, related service specialists, and so on and so forth. And they also conduct risk assessments for students at risk of suicide and homicide, providing crisis intervention services as needed. And these are your social workers throughout the district. So you may have also heard the term non-CST social workers. So this is something that's exclusive to our particular district. We do have child study team social workers, and then we have non-child study team social workers. So what does a non-CST social worker do? The non-child study team social worker is not a member of the child study team, surprise, and they do not oversee a caseload of students for writing IEPs and so on and so forth and providing overarching services. Instead, their role is to provide the IEP mandated counseling and mental health services that the student might need. So whatever the IEP plan says is what they will provide. They conduct social skills groups and they conduct lessons to address individualized and specific needs. They might connect with families for appropriate social and emotional services. They work collaboratively with the child study team, of course, to make sure that the students are receiving the necessary services, and they collaborate with teachers and administrators to support the students in the classroom. And there are many, many non-child study team social workers, and there wasn't enough room on this slide to list them all. So they are not all listed on here because there's too many of them. Speech therapist. So what does your speech therapist do? Your speech therapist's role is to evaluate and provide educationally related services that target the area of speech and language and communication. So there's a number of different areas that they look at for different students. It might be articulation, forms of alternate communication, like communication devices, language skills, social communication, voice usage, stuttering, cognitive communication, um, just all different kinds of interventions for speech. And they also do work on feeding and swallowing, like feeding therapy and that kind of a thing if it's needed. They also provide supports in all different settings. So they might push into the classroom and work with the child directly in the classroom, or they might pull the child out and do speech sessions outside the classroom. They may work with the child individually or in a small group, or they might engage in consultation where they're ready to remove the child from speech services, but they just want to monitor for a little bit before they do that. They consult with teachers and the child study team and parents and guardians about speech and language concerns, and they participate in IEP meetings and provide information related to their area of expertise as appropriate in those meetings. Next is the occupational therapist. You'll often hear this referred to as the OT, which stands for occupational therapy. So the occupational therapist evaluates and provides the services that are necessary to help a student perform particular tasks that are necessary to participate in school or to help them learn. And they find ways to help the student do the things that they want to do using the different interventions that they provide. So typically this has to do with fine motor skills, writing, grasping, doing your zipper, tying your shoes, that kind of a thing. So they target all these different areas, like, using school tools like a pencil or scissors, participating in physical education, being able to grasp an item when they're playing a game in PE, independent living skills, like I said, the zippering and the tying the shoes and so on and so forth. They provide these services, again, just like the speech therapist, in a variety of different environments. Inside the classroom, if that's appropriate, pulling out into a separate setting, if that's appropriate, in small group or individual or on consultation. They consult with the teachers and child study team members, parents and guardians about the occupational therapy concerns, and they participate in IEP meetings as appropriate or as needed. Physical therapist or PT. Physical therapy typically has to do with gross motor skills, walking up and down stairs, bouncing a ball, skipping, jumping, hopping, that kind of a thing. So the physical therapist will evaluate and provide interventions that increase the child's ability to move about throughout the school and to participate in classroom activities. So they might, like we talked about, traveling around the environment, participating in activities where they might be required to hop over something or get up and walk from one place to another, navigating around different furniture and so on and so forth. Stairs, restrooms, cafeteria, that kind of thing. So they provide the service in formats, again, pull out, push in, if that's needed for the child in an individual, small group, or consultation basis. They consult with teachers, child study team members, parents, and guardians about the physical therapy. I'm sorry, that should say physical therapy, not occupational therapy. My apologies, concerns. And they participate in IEP meetings as needed. Next is your BCBA, or Board Certified Behavior Analyst, or Behavior Specialist, we often refer to them. So a behavior specialist receives specialized training and certification related to addressing student behaviors that impact the student's progress and growth in the classroom. So they identify those triggers and they look for ways to help eliminate triggers that are going to cause problems and difficulties for the child. So they observe how the child responds when a stimulus is changed. So if if the door slamming upsets me, and then I can't focus on my work, then we look for maybe something that cushions the door so when the door closes, it doesn't cause a slamming noise. And then I watch to see, does that rectify it? And are you able to focus better on your educational, lessons if I change that stimuli for you? They track and analyze that ABC data or information related to the antecedent or what happens before a particular behavior, the behavior itself, and then the consequence or what happens after the behavior. They provide suggestions, trainings, modifications, and behavior intervention plans to address the individual needs of students. And they provide this intervention for individual students or for groups of students. They can do either one. They consult with faculty, administration, parents, and guardians, and students as needed for their particular area of expertise, and they may participate in IEP meetings if needed. And last is our evidence-based reading or EBR teacher. You may often hear people refer to the EBR teacher, and EBR stands for evidence-based reading. So this is a teacher that provides pull-out instruction that addresses specific needs related to students who are not progressing in reading. So they target specialized and multisensory reading intervention strategies for students who need that. They utilize tools, techniques, and strategies from a variety of evidence-based sources that meet the individual needs of the student. So what EBR instruction looks like for one student might look different from what it looks like for another student. One student may need this kind of intervention where another student needs that kind of intervention. So it doesn't look exactly the same, but they're pulling from evidence-based programming and sources so that we know the students are receiving the instruction that they need. As they work with the student, they then collect data and monitor the student's progress on their reading skills so that they can target the intervention as the student progresses, but also determine the appropriateness of continuing pull-out services. We don't want to pull the students out any more than we have to. So if a student reaches a point where they don't need to be pulled out for these services anymore, then we're sure that we take a look at that and we get the student reintegrated back into the classroom. They also serve as an educational consultant to the faculty, administration, parents, guardians, and the child study team for issues related to reading. So I really just filled your brain with a whole lot of information. So hopefully you were able to gather some information there that was beneficial to you. And if questions come up, certainly feel free to ask them. I'm going to actually turn it back over to Ms. Constantino for any questions that may have come up along the way, if we
Yes.
have time for that.
Yeah, we have a few minutes before it's 8:30, so let's take some of them.
Okay.
I think one that is a couple of people asked about it. The presentation you just gave, will that be available like as a slide deck posted on the website? I mean, we'd certainly post it on our website, but
Yes.
the district website? Okay.
Yes, so I'm hoping to be able to post this up after I change the one slide that says occupational therapy that should say physical therapy. I'm hoping to post that up so that it's there and available for
Awesome.
review.
Okay. And for those of you watching, this is also being recorded and will be on the district's YouTube channel. So people can watch it there from the beginning if you missed the beginning. We also, let's see, someone had asked when you were talking about the tiers of support, and if you could share examples of what a tier 1 and tier 2 supports look like.
Mhm. So that can be very different for different students. So a tier 1 support, we might have a child that is struggling with, I'm trying to think of something that they would struggle with. They're struggling with adding fractions. And they are working on adding fractions and they just can't get it. And so the teacher might stop and take a step back and provide the child with manipulatives to understand the concept of what adding fractions actually is. So now I'm going to have two pizza pies and I'm going to have 2/3 and 1/3 and I'm going to add that together and I'm going to make 3/3 which equals 1, and I hope that's right. My math isn't great sometimes. So they might like take that step back from maybe what they're doing on paper with numbers to a pictorial representation to help the child grasp the concept and move forward. So that would be like a tier 1 intervention that could happen in the classroom at any time if we have a child that needs that particular intervention. Tier 2, on the other hand, if I have a child who is struggling with a particular content of a reading assignment, I may set up stations in my classroom where the children go around and do different stations, but for these 3 children who are struggling with this content, I'm gonna have a small group for them, and that's their particular station that they're gonna go to, and I'm gonna reteach them something that everybody else seems to have grasped, and they're gonna work on something else, but these 3 children now are gonna work on extra time receiving, that more direct intervention from the teacher. Or maybe I have an academic interventionist who's going to pull you out one time a week, and we're going to work just on vocabulary building because you're struggling with vocabulary building, that kind of a thing. So now it's much more targeted. It's a much smaller group of students. It's really individualized to what your individual needs are. And we're looking like a little closer at some more intensive supports. Moving on to tier 3, then of course with INRS, where now we have like a whole plan, and I might pull you out for academic intervention 3 times a week or 4 times a week. So as we work our way up, it becomes more and more targeted, individualized, and intense. So I hope that helps a little bit.
It does. I actually want to do a follow-up with, at what point I know at tier 3, you'd reach out to the family or the parent, but at tier 1 or tier 2, would the parent expect to hear from the teacher about those
So
interventions or?
Tier 1's kind of a day-to-day thing that happens in
Right.
the
It's kind of
classroom, right? So it's
universal,
not necessarily, something that you might hear about. If we're
right,
working on fractions, I give you your manipulative, it takes a day or 2, you get it, and you keep moving. You
right,
you might not necessarily hear about that. Once you
right,
reach tier 2 and we're to a point where I might be pulling you aside and working with you a little more intensely, a parent may hear from the teacher. That might pop up in a progress report,
right,
that, student A is really struggling with this content. We've been pulling out and working on this a little more intensely. Once you reach tier 3, of course, and INRS is involved in all that. Now it's more formalized. Parents come to meetings and, all those
right,
different pieces. But I would think at the tier 2 level, even if you just hear about it in a progress report or, like a weekly note home or something like that, I would think that you might start to hear about some different aspects at the tier 2 level. I won't say that that happens in every situation because I'm not in every classroom, and
sure,
I can't speak to that universally, but I would think at that point you're starting to, especially if I'm giving you tier 2 intervention and it's not working and we're having to try like a whole bunch of different things, and
right.
you might hear about that then. So,
Okay, all right.
right.
Let's move on to some other ones. Let's see. I see this one. All right, there are a lot now. All of a sudden,
I've triggered more questions.
you did. That's all right, because like we said, if we don't get to them all, we'll send them and we'll get that information.
Certainly.
What is the criteria? What are the criteria for deciding a placement out of district versus an in district? How
So
does that
we
happen?
we really do everything that we can to help our students be successful in districts because we really want them to be in their home school or in their, in their community with their peers and, all of those different pieces. So we really, really work very hard to help our children be successful in district if we can. When we reach a point where we're just not making progress anymore. We're not moving forward. We've tried this and that and the other thing, and we're just not making progress anymore. Then we're gonna start to take a look. Or if we have very specialized instruction that's needed, something that we don't offer at all, then we might, for example, if we have a student who is, let's say, deaf and blind and we need specialized instruction, I might not have that in district, because it's such a specialized kind of program that I might be sending a child out to a school that offers services specific to children who are deaf and blind, that kind of a thing. So that would be another situation where there's really not even anything to try there if I need this particular intervention, that kind of a thing. And we just don't have it. So, but we really do everything that we can. If we can keep our students in district with their peers, that's definitely our preference.
Right.
So
And it is, I'll say, like, it really is about the programming, right? So it's sort of like what our district has in terms of programming and what it might
Right,
not have. So, uh,
right. And that's an IEP team decision, right? So the
right.
IEP team comes together and they do that. They do the present levels. They do the baseline thing where they look at where our students are and they look at what we tried, what's worked, what hasn't worked.
Mhm.
What progress have we made since the last IEP meeting? Have we met our goals and objectives? That kind of a thing. And if we really have tried everything and we're still not making progress, the team collectively works together to make that decision and then talk about, okay, if this is what we're looking at, what schools are out there that might offer, the services that we need for this child. So we would list that all out and then we would ask for permission to send records. A parent has to consent to that. We can't just arbitrarily send records for a student to an out of district placement. The parent would have to agree. And then we send records. And if the school agrees, then we go for an intake. And the case manager and the parent and the student all go together. And we visit the different schools and we talk about, what kind of programming they offer, what does their schedule look like? What do their activities look like? What's it look like in the classroom? What supports are you offering that are going to support the child? And then we make a decision together about which school would be the best fit for the child. And there are lots of different pieces involved in that. How far away is the school? Are there a lot of children there the same age as my child? There are lots of different things that come into play, and then we just try to pick the school that's the best fit for the child.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Um, so when there's transition from one building to the next, is it practice for the district for a child study team member from to the new building? Like, so you're going from fifth grade to sixth grade, is
Right.
somebody from the middle school will come and attend the last IEP meeting of the year, like that transition meeting? Is that something that the district practices?
So that's not always the case. That may be the case in some instances. Capacity wise, we're just not able to for a case manager to attend to run all of their own annual reviews and attend all of the annual reviews for all the children coming up. So we don't always do that. There are situations where we do. Where we would have a case manager from the new school attend. And certainly, if a parent brought that up, they could have that conversation with their case manager to see whether or not that was possible. Something that we do, even if the case manager doesn't attend the IEP meeting the previous year for the rising student,
Mhm.
we do articulation it's called articulation every year, where the case managers in one school meet with the case managers of the upcoming school and they meet about the students that are coming up on the caseload and they talk about their needs and their particular profiles and what supports have been successful and that kind of a thing. So even if they don't attend that meeting, they do still have that articulation meeting before the end of the year so that when the students move up, the whole team for the upcoming school is familiar, knows the students, knows their particular needs, plans ahead for them, that kind of a thing.
Okay. Um, so I don't know if you have this information, but what percentage of the paraprofessionals are one versus shared, and how is that determination made?
Okay, so I don't have that information. I don't know the percentage. So sorry, I
Yeah,
don't
that's
have
all
it
right.
this evening. So when it comes to paraprofessionals, the goal really is for the least amount of involvement possible because we want the children, of course, to be independent and not to need that support, especially as our students get older. Because once you start hitting like middle school and high school, the social piece starts to really play a role there, and the students aren't always receptive to having paraprofessional support. So the decision about whether there's a paraprofessional at all, there's a shared paraprofessional, a one-to-one paraprofessional, really has to do with the individual needs of the student and whether or not they need someone with them all the time. Do they just need somebody who's in the classroom and working with a small group of students and able to help you when you need it? Do you not need an individualized paraprofessional at all, and a classroom paraprofessional who's working with the classroom as a whole is sufficient, or not need anyone at all? So the IEP team looks at all of the different pieces related to that and whether or not that support is needed. If there's another option to support a child as opposed to putting a paraprofessional in place, we always try that option first because it's less restrictive than adding the paraprofessional. Once we start getting into a one-to-one paraprofessional, that's more restrictive than some other efforts that we might make. So we try to stay least restrictive and only do that, if that particular need is necessary. So that's really, again, that's so individualized to the student and their particular needs. There's no like um, one thing that says, okay, you get a one-to-one paraprofessional or you get a shared paraprofessional or that kind of a thing.
Okay. So if a student has an IEP for speech only, where do they fall on the continuum of programming?
So that would be a student who's just receiving related services.
Mhm.
And they typically are going to be in the very beginning where we talked about the student who doesn't have any level of supports in the general education classroom, but maybe they just get pulled out for speech and the speech teacher consults with the teacher. So I didn't have that individual profile in that continuum, but it falls like right at the beginning in the less restrictive components. So like I said, the student would probably either get pulled out or have some push-in services with the speech therapist. Speech therapist would consult with the teachers to provide strategies for in the classroom and that kind of a thing. But typically, we wouldn't see, other than if they just happen to be assigned to an ICS classroom or something like that, we wouldn't see that kind of, that kind of support.
And is it correct that a speech only does not have the child study team involved? It's the
Correct.
speech therapist, the teacher,
Yes.
the
Yeah.
parent is the
The
team,
parent.
and
Yeah.
the student. Okay.
Yes. Yes. That is accurate. I did leave that out. I apologize. I
No, that's
apologize.
okay. Somebody asked. So.
Mhm.
Let's see. For students who are in an IEP program, is there a standard way of keeping parents updated on services provided in progress? So what's the means of sharing progress and information?
Sure. So, when we have an IEP in place and goals and objectives, we are required to report out on progress towards goals and objectives at the same time that report cards come out. So, when report cards come out within that time frame, within that general time frame, you would also receive an IEP progress report that says, these are the goals and objectives, and this is the progress that we're making towards those goals and objectives. So, at a bare minimum, you definitely would receive that. Conversations with the teacher, the related service providers, the child study team, case manager at any time can also, you can also get additional updates along the way. There might be meetings along the way. And then, of course, at the annual review, there would be discussion at the annual review about progress that occurred since the last IEP meeting and so on and so forth. So, but at a bare minimum, of course, your annual review and your progress reports around the same time as report cards come out.
Okay, and I'll mention here that for just to make sure everybody knows that the frontline is system where the IEP is connected to Power School. So when you go in and
Yes.
see your student's progress report from maybe the gen ed classroom, the IEP progress report is under the frontline, right? There's a connection, there's another, stage there that to find that information, just so people know that it's not going to be on that first part of Power School. It's in the frontline part of Power School.
Right, right.
And you can email us if you need to understand that more,
Yes.
more explanation on that. Um, so, and then maybe this will be our last one because it's getting 8:38 now. But this is important. Well, they're all important, but this one I think for parent referral, what information do you need to get the ball rolling for an evaluation? And this is for a child that's not in the district yet.
Okay, so the referral process. So if you have a child who's not in the district yet, not registered in the district, we can't do any of the referral process until the child is registered in the district, with one exception. The one exception to that rule is an approaching 3-year-old. So a child who is within the 120-day window before their third birthday, you do not have to be enrolled in the district, you just have to prove residency. So you can prove residency and refer your child prior to registration. But other than that, we can't engage in the process of referral until you're registered in the district. However, if you are registered in the district and you would like to refer your child, we have an email at referrals@somsd.k12.nj.us. That you can send your referral to. And really the only thing that you need to start that process is just to say, I'd like to have my child evaluated by the child study team. That's it. You don't need anything fancy. You don't need to come with doctor's reports or anything like that. So if you send that referral in, it's routed to my secretary, who then assigns a case manager, and then the case manager will be in touch with the parent or guardian to set up what's called a planning meeting within 20 days. So within 20 days, they'll hold that planning meeting, and the child study team, which is the school psychologist, the social worker, and the learning consultant, as well as the speech therapist, if we're talking about a preschool child, and the classroom teacher will meet with the parent, and you have an opportunity to kind of talk about your concerns and your issues with what's going on and why you would like your child to be evaluated. You can bring, sometimes parents will have outside reports or they'll have notes from the doctor or that kind of a thing. You can bring those. Sometimes parents will bring work samples to kind of talk about that. So anything that you would want to bring to the meeting that, helps with the discussion, you can bring to that meeting. And then the child study team, those three members, the school psychologist, the social worker, and the learning consultant, determine whether or not evaluations are warranted. If evaluations are warranted, then you would move forward with evaluations. There are situations where evaluations would not be founded or warranted. One of those situations would be if there were no interventions attempted, no general education interventions attempted prior to evaluation. So the teacher, the INRS team, the whomever needs to try something first before we evaluate. So we would want to see that that was in place. If we had a child that maybe missed a couple years of school, that's considered a lack of instruction, and we would not be able to evaluate until we resolve the instruction component, making sure that they got instruction, or if the child's not demonstrating an impact, that we have a student that, is getting along with all of their peers, is coming to school every day, is getting good grades, is showing their state testing shows that they're doing fine academically, that kind of a thing. If we have a situation where we're not seeing an impact, then we would not evaluate at that point, but we might still monitor. We might refer the child to the INRS team or something like that if that's warranted. Okay,
All right, thank you.
my pleasure.
All right, so we're going to take all the rest of the questions, because there are quite a few now, and compile them and send them to Ms. Bodine and follow up with her. Is that all right to Ms. Bodine?
Yes, yes,
Okay, okay.
absolutely.
So because now it's getting later, but we really appreciate you coming and sharing this presentation with us,
Pleasure.
explaining all the many parts of the Special Services Department. For
Many
those
moving
of you,
parts, right?
many moving parts. For those of you on the call, if you'd like to go to our website, www.cpacsoma.org, and sign up for our mailings and just read about what we're doing, you're welcome to. And have a good evening. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for coming.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it.